Hey, what's up YouTube? Down the Smartphone Guy coming back at you with another video, and tonight I want to do a comparison of two fantastic budget-friendly devices. In my right hand I have the Huawei Mate SE, also known as kind of like an Honor 7X Plus, because this is basically an Honor 7X with upgraded specs. And then in my left hand I have a brand new device from a company called Nuu Mobile. This is the Nuu Mobile G3. So like I mentioned, both of these phones are budget friendly, both come at around that $200 price point. So let's go ahead and compare what all these things have to offer. Alright, so I want to go ahead and start off this comparison with a discussion of the prices of these two devices. So let's go ahead and start off with the Huawei Mate SE since it launched first. So this one is available right now on Amazon.com for $230. I have seen it for $250 at a number of different retailers, but like I mentioned, at Amazon it is available for $230. And so I'll leave a link down in the description. Now, with the new G3, you can actually pick this one up for $200, and I haven't seen the price change at all. Basically, it's been $200 since launch day, which was really only maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. But it is available right now on Amazon for $200. So again, link will be down in the description. So when it comes to price, obviously the new G3 is the more budget-friendly of the two, but not by a whole lot. So now let's go ahead and talk about the build quality of these two devices. So when it comes to build quality, I think it's really a matter of preference, which one is more your style. So obviously the new G3 has that glass back, also has a curved front and curved back that you can see there, and so it's definitely the more, I would say, one-handed friendly and maybe a little bit more slick looking device. But if you prefer kind of like that old metal slab style, this one definitely is a little bit more boring, but definitely I think a little bit more solid when it comes to the build quality. So if you drop this one, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable dropping the Huawei Mate SE than I would the new G3. But really it's kind of just a matter of preference. Overall, I would say for me personally, I probably prefer the Mate SE. Partially because I actually prefer that wider display and wider phone in hand feel anyways. So the next area I want to talk about is the screen. So when it comes to the two screens on these devices, there's kind of a big difference here. And the Huawei Mate SE has a 5.93-inch display, so basically a 6-inch display. It is an 18:9 aspect ratio, and it's 1080p, whereas on the new G3 we also have an 18:9 aspect ratio, but it's 720p, and you do actually notice it. When I did my initial review of the new G3, I kind of mentioned that you didn't really notice the fact that it's 720p, but after further examination, using it a lot more over the last week or two, I do notice the pixels here with the new G3. It's not a big deal, it's not a major deal breaker when it comes to the display. It's still a nice display. My one complaint I'd have is not about the 720p, but it's when you're trying to watch maybe a video at night, this display does not get nearly as dark as most displays, so that is one issue I had. It just kind of gets a little too bright at night. So you can see the difference in the Mate SE when it's at its dimmest versus the new G3. It's not a huge deal, it's not a deal breaker, but I do wish that the new G3 would get just a little bit darker at its darkest setting. So you can see at that setting it's a little bit too bright for my display here. So anyways, let's go ahead and go back into the displays here and turn them back up. Alright, so the next area I want to compare between these two devices is the camera. So we have a 13 and 5 megapixel camera on the new G3, and then on the front we have a 13 megapixel camera for selfies. On the Huawei Mate SE we have a 16 and 2 megapixel camera, and then an 8 megapixel camera for selfies. So let's go ahead and start off with the challenger when it comes to the camera settings. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. So in order to adjust the different camera settings, we're basically just going to slide through here. Now one thing I will mention is that technically for video we can shoot in 4K. So if I come down here into video quality, you can see that 4K is an option. Now, to be completely honest with you, I would definitely recommend shooting in 1080p because it actually looks better. The 4K just is a little bit too much for this device to handle. So we do have photos, of course. We have a portrait mode. So one cool thing about the portrait mode here is that it does allow us to bring kind of the foreground and background in and out of focus. So we can change and adjust our f-stop. So we can go over here up to f11. So at f11, basically that's going to bring everything into focus. And then as we lower our f-stop down to like 0.8, that's going to blur out the background more and more. So if I take this picture, basically the background would be out of focus, whereas the foreground, whatever's in my foreground, would be in focus. So that's a nice option. That is also available over here. The new G3 actually does a pretty decent job there. So then we have beauty mode, and you can see we can adjust our beauty mode there as well. We have panorama, mono, and so mono is basically just black and white. And then we do also have our pro mode, so we can adjust our settings there as well in the pro mode. So lots of options here on the new G3, which is pretty impressive for a $200 phone. However, when it comes to impressive cameras on a roughly $200 phone, I think the Mate SE definitely takes the win here. So if we go into our camera settings, we can only shoot in 1080p when it comes to video, but here is our wide aperture mode. So when it comes to wide aperture mode, you can see that we can really adjust that aperture here as well. So we can go from f16 all the way down to f.95, and the Mate SE definitely does a great job when it comes to the aperture, because you can actually adjust the aperture both when you take the photo and then also when you do the post-production. So I can come back in here and adjust the aperture now if I want to. So I can adjust it, and you can see that it'll change the foreground and background and blur it in and out of focus. Now, because I was so close to everything, it wouldn't really adjust it a whole lot here. But then I can also adjust the point of focus in post-production on the Mate SE, which is a great option as well. And then you can see we actually have a separate portrait mode, and we have a live action, or they call it moving picture, and then we just switch the camera around here. So all kinds of options here. Now there is actually a portrait mode available here as well, as you can see on the selfie camera. So again, that portrait mode is basically just going to blur out the background and bring your selfie into focus. Alright, so that is the camera on the Mate SE. I'm going to go ahead and show you some photos now, so you can kind of compare them for yourselves, make a decision which one you think has the better of the two cameras. Alright, so the next area I want to talk about is the performance of these two devices. So I have up here the Geekbench 4 scores. So you can see the Geekbench 4 scores for the new mobile G3. So we have a multi-core score of 3318, single core score of 771, and over here on the Huawei Mate SE we have a single core score of 922 and a multi-core score of 3491. Now this has a HiSilicon Kirin 659 processor clocked at 2.39 gigahertz, I believe is what that's at. And then over here we have a Helio P25 processor. So what does that mean in real world terms? Well, I can say that from experience I've used both of these pretty extensively at this point. The Huawei Mate SE for me definitely is, it's obvious that these scores do kind of bear out in day-to-day performance. The new G3 has some stutters here and there. Also, because it's running the Helio P25, I just kind of ran into a couple of bugs in various apps. So just something worth mentioning, whereas the Mate SE, I don't run into those bugs nearly as often. And so I definitely have to give performance, no doubt, to the Mate SE. Now, both of these phones perform fairly well, especially for that $200 price point. It's just that the Mate SE, for me personally, has the more fluid and better day-to-day usage when it comes to performance. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about the battery life of these two devices, and let's go ahead and start off with some specs here. So the new G3 has a 3000 mAh battery. As far as charging goes, we have Type-C charging and we do have fast charging as well, so thumbs up to new G3 there. On the Mate SE, we have a 3340 mAh battery and micro USB charging and no fast charging. Now, in terms of day-to-day usage, in general, I pretty much get the same battery life out of these two devices. I would say the new G3 maybe has just slightly better battery life. I was getting through a day with about 30, maybe 40% battery left over on the G3, which is really pretty fantastic for only a 3000 mAh battery. Whereas on the Huawei Mate SE, generally I'm finishing a day with around 25, maybe 35% battery, depending on my usage. In both cases, really around 5 to 6 hours of screen on time was pretty normal. So for that, I do have to give the new G3 the win for battery life, mainly because of the fact that it both has Type-C and fast charging. And that's probably why I give the win over here to the G3. Alright, so the next area I want to talk about is the software of these two devices. So the new G3 has Android 7.1.1. You can see right now I have the January security patch, so a little bit older security patch there. Whereas on the Huawei Mate SE, it's running EMUI in the background of Android 7.0. And somewhere in here, let's see if I can find it, we have the March security patch. So I actually just got that security patch maybe just a couple days ago. So nice updates from Huawei. Now, which one do I expect to get Android Oreo first? Well, I would definitely expect this one to get Android Oreo because I know that on the Honor 7X they already have it available as a beta, so I would expect this one to also get that relatively soon. Now when it comes to the actual software, the new G3 definitely has the more stock Android feel to it. So if I go through here, basically it looks like Android 7.0 with just a couple of small tweaks. So we have some system gestures and some one-handed mode options, but other than that, pretty much just stock Android. So just a couple of tweaks there in terms of the software, but overall, like I mentioned, pretty much the stock Android over here on the G3. Now, the Mate SE has a ton of features built into its software here. So we have a bunch of smart assistant options. We have some fingerprint ID options, so you can actually use the fingerprint to navigate through the system. We have some navigation keys, just all kinds of things built into EMUI 5.0. Now, some of those things can be gimmicky. We have App Twin. Some of those things are good, some things you will use, some things you won't use. I tend to like the options available on EMUI. It is definitely less stock feeling, there's no question about that, and I prefer stock generally, but I've gotten used to EMUI, and so I kind of appreciate some of the things that they offer in the software that you don't get with stock Android. So it's really kind of a tough one there software wise. I just maybe give a slight advantage to EMUI, but overall it's really almost a draw. It really just depends on which one is your preference there. Alright, so next area I want to talk about is the audio of these two devices. So the new G3, you can see, does not have a headphone jack. It does come with a dongle, Type-C dongle for plugging in your headphones. And overall, I definitely prefer the fact that the Huawei Mate SE does have the headphone jack. So I'm going to have to give the win for audio over to the Mate SE. However, when it comes to the actual external speakers, neither of these have particularly great external speakers. The new G3 has just a single firing bottom firing speaker over here, so it's actually on the left on the new G3, whereas on the Mate SE it's down over here on the right. Neither of them are particularly great when it comes to the external speakers, so I'm going to kind of call that a draw, but the Mate SE has to give the overall win, or gets the overall win for audio because of the fact that it has the headphone jack available. All right, so the last couple things I want to mention are a couple of areas that the new G3 excels that unfortunately the Huawei Mate SE doesn't have. So the first one is dual band Wi-Fi. So with new G3, you actually have dual band Wi-Fi available. So that means you have 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz for Wi-Fi, whereas on the Huawei Mate SE, we just have single 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, no dual band available there. A second area that the new G3 has that the Mate SE doesn't have is it does have NFC for mobile payments. So again, the Mate SE does not have that. So overall, which one of these two phones is the better phone? Well, it's really kind of a tough call, to be honest with you. I think overall, in just day-to-day experience, I kind of prefer the Mate SE mainly because of the performance. And it's not to say that the new G3 is a terrible performing phone. It's just that the Mate SE is the more fluid of the two phones for me personally. I forgot to mention here, and this probably should have been mentioned a long time ago, but both of these phones have 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of onboard storage, and micro SD expansion. So that's really kind of a draw. But the overall experience, performance-wise, I'm not sure software I can really give an advantage to the Mate SE, but in terms of the cameras, I kind of prefer the Mate SE. So just the overall win goes to this one for me personally, but for a lot of people, I think the new G3 could be an absolutely fantastic device. It offers a lot of things at that $200 price point that a lot of phones don't have, like Type-C charging, fast charging, NFC, just all kinds of things that this phone has that a lot of phones at this price point just can't compare to. So this is really a great phone, one worth considering. I'll leave a link down in the description for both of them. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.